Anger grows against Myanmar's military coup. As protests spread, foreign companies are under pressure to cut ties with the army's vast business empire. But will withdrawing investments be enough to bring back civilian rule? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Threats of arrest and internet shutdowns have not deterred people from denouncing last week's military coup in Myanmar. In fact, protests have now spread to several cities. Tens of thousands of people rallied for a second day in Myanmar's largest city, Yangon. They want the army generals to release Aung San Suu Kyi and restore her democratically elected government. She's been charged with violating import-export laws, something her supporters say is an excuse to keep her detained. The military has disrupted access to social media to stop people organizing the demonstrations. Now there's growing pressure on international companies to cut ties with Myanmar to put pressure on the coup leaders. The military has extensive business interests that it operates through dozens of companies. A UN fact-finding mission in 2019 found these covered everything from construction to pharmaceuticals and tourism. And much of the revenue from these businesses goes directly to the top coup leaders and their families. Japan's brewing giant Kirin is ending a joint venture with a company linked to the military. The firm says it's deeply concerned by the coup, adding it decided to invest in 2015 to help Myanmar's democratic reforms. Local businesses are worried that more international firms will leave.
It is difficult to work under an unelected government. It creates major problems for investment. International business will have problems coming into the country. The market is very narrow in Myanmar. It will be harder for foreign firms to work here if Myanmar is put under sanctions. If so, then they will leave Myanmar to maintain their image. So the coup will affect our businesses and especially foreign investment.
All right, let's bring in our guests in Bangkok. Debbie Stothard, founder and coordinator of ALTSEAN-Burma, a network of ASEAN organizations working to support human rights and democracy in Myanmar. In London, Ronan, visiting scholar at Queen Mary University of London and author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide. In DeKalb, Illinois, Tharaphi, associate professor at the Department of World Languages and Cultures at Northern Illinois University. A warm welcome to you all. Debbie, let me start with you today. Now that Kirin has cut ties with MEHL, that's the conglomerate with ties to Myanmar's military, do we expect that more companies, or at least more foreign companies, are going to be doing the same?
I think any company that understands its obligations for human rights due diligence should cut its ties with any military-owned companies. The military these military companies are notorious for some of the worst human rights violations, including wide-scale land grabbing in the country. And it's time that the military didn't make human rights violations a profitable business.
Ronan, could you tell us a little bit more about Myanmar Economic Holdings public company? This is this conglomerate with ties to Myanmar's military. What do we know about its ties to the military and also its ownership structure?
Well, the ties to the military are incredibly close. The military has worked for 6 decades to pilfer money from ordinary Burmese people. They've constructed a wide range of companies. I mean, there's hundreds of business interests in Myanmar that are controlled, owned, and directed by Myanmar's military. And any international company that does business with them is helping to put money into the pocket of Myanmar's military, and importantly, to put money into the pocket of the hangers-on, the cronies associated with military leaders. Family members and other people who have managed to become rich through their connections with the military. And this has had an effect of retarding other economic growth in Myanmar. It means that businesses that aren't connected with the military have as a result struggled, and that needs to change.
Tharaphi, in 2019, United Nations investigators warned global companies that were doing business with this conglomerate, MEHL, that they were aiding the military and that they were at high risk of contributing to human rights abuses in Myanmar. What was the response from businesses at the time?
Well, it goes hand in hand with the changes, right? So the international communities, all the businesses think that we have the liberal democracy, right? The businesses settings reflected that, thinking that both, the political system and the economic systems will trickle down. That trickle down business approach doesn't work. So this is what is going on. So, but I would like to emphasize that, the military holdings and also the companies that do not have, bad reputations as much as the Kiran, like this. So we have now Telenor, we have now Ooredoo. Actually, these two companies, the global companies, could have immediate impact on what is going on inside the country, right? So Ooredoo makes more than $250 million profit in 2019, and the same for Telenor. They make over $800 million. So these companies also rethink. They were asked to ban internet, and they bow to the military request. So we tend to overlook these, but they can have immediate impact. The movements inside the country call the world to bear witness to what is going on. And, they know that a serious crime is going to be committed. And these telecommunications are switching the light off on the wall. So when we talk about sanctions and businesses with the army, we have to look into these really, big companies that have actually good reputations around the world. So, I mean, so we have to look, comprehensively on what is going on.
The United States is planning new sanctions on Myanmar, but it's unclear how effective these will be. The U.S. isn't even among its top 5 trading partners. Myanmar is more reliant on China than any other country. So far, the Chinese government has only noted what took place and called for stability. Thailand is also an important partner. It's the second biggest market for Myanmar's goods. The Thai Deputy Prime Minister has called the military takeover an internal affair. Others, like India, Japan, and South Korea, could be essential to put pressure on the coup leaders. Debbie, let me ask you, it's all very well for Japanese companies like Kirin to pull out of Myanmar, but what is all this going to do when it comes to Chinese companies, when it comes to other countries who are very much invested in Myanmar right now?
Well, let's face the reality that the U.S. market is still one of the largest markets for Chinese companies and Chinese products. And if China breaks sanctions and includes Burmese products produced by military companies from Burma in their supply chain, they're going to face the same challenges that has happened, where the U.S. Customs actually confiscated textiles and garments from China because Uyghur slave labor from the Uyghur concentration camps went into those supply chains. This is not just about whether we buy things from Burma. It's about everybody along the supply chain. Any business that has Burmese products in their supply chain needs to have some proper due diligence.
Ronan, I saw you nodding along to Debbie there. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that it's important that any business that's doing trade with Myanmar moving forward is able to demonstrate that it doesn't have connections with the military. And it's very clear that unlike under the Trump administration, Biden is taking an interest in Myanmar, and Biden's administration will take action. It's unclear what that will be. I mean, I think it's quite likely to be some form of sanctions, but there's an opportunity, I think, for the Biden administration to really target their sanctions in a way that hurts the businesses that are connected with the military. And at the same time, that will provide an advantage to businesses that aren't connected with Myanmar's military. I mean, that's the way forward. That's what will help use business pressure, financial pressure, to make the cronies pressure the military to step away from their coup and to restore democracy. It's important too. I mean, I agree with the point that was made earlier about major telecommunications companies. They've got good reputations in other parts of the world, and they have an opportunity in Myanmar to simply refuse to take the orders from the coup leaders. They can say quite clearly that the military does not represent the legitimate government of Myanmar, and that they won't take its orders to shut down the internet.
Tharaphi, you heard Ronan there talk about the fact that U.S. President Biden is threatening to impose new sanctions against Myanmar's military. How much of an impact do you think that would have?
That will have impact. But another thing we can do is, the previous coup and the previous dictatorship got away without any impunity, right? So that is a wrong message the international community not sent. But this is the weakness of the sanctions, because they are powerful symbolically. But if there is no impunity, so like Nigeria did with the dictatorship Abuja, right? There was a lawyer group that tried to find money and return it to Nigeria. If we could do it, that would be a real strong message. This is a real repercussion for the militaries. But the other thing I would like to point out is that we talk about Telenor and Ooredoo. So they actually were operating under the legal frameworks, the business models the international community accepted. We have to realize that this model is flawed, because we relied on the trickle down of right now 16% of internet is working, and it is operated by very small communications companies. So if many players, especially the locally owned businesses, could thrive in the business model, not the capitalists, the liberal capitalism that the West has promoted. I mean, that is working. So these people, the 16% of the internet, of course, some of them, are for the government channels, but the rest is run by these small companies. So this is a real good example, and people should take lesson from it.
Ronan, I want to take a step back and take a look for a second at one particular person at the top of the military food chain in Myanmar. That's General Min Aung Hlaing. He, of course, is the top military commander in the country. He is now leading the country since the coup. How much has he enriched himself as head of the army in Myanmar?
Well, his family have developed a business empire based on their connections with him. I mean, there's real talk that one of the key reasons for the coup was to protect the financial interests of Min Aung Hlaing and his family. He was due to retire later this year, and the feeling that the National League for Democracy government under Aung San Suu Kyi might frustrate his ability to stay on caused him to launch the coup. Because his fear, of course, would have been that once he's out of power, that he can't provide the protection and the contacts and the sweet deals for his family to continue to enrich themselves at the expense of ordinary people in Myanmar. I mean, in many ways at its core, this coup is about the economy, and it's about who gets to control Myanmar's economy.
Debbie, I see you nodding quite a bit to what Ronan is saying. I mean, let me pose the question to you based on what Ronan said. Do you believe that had Min Aung Hlaing actually stepped aside, as he was scheduled to do later this summer, having been aged out of his military leadership role, was there the danger of him potentially being investigated for these lucrative deals? And how much of a problem would that have been for him?
Well, the NLD was elected for a second term with a much bigger majority, and that would have emboldened it and empowered it to ensure that this government put a hold and put its foot down when it came to corruption, when it came to whittling away at military economic power. The big problem in Burma now, or Myanmar now, is that this is a country of immense economic growth, but the lion's share of the profits is being held by the military and their cronies and not being equitably distributed. Going back to Ronan's book on the Rohingya genocide, a lot of people fail to realize that new FDI in the country fell by 67% immediately in the year after the Rohingya genocide in 2017. That represents nearly 3 years of the national health budget. And that's particularly important given that Burma is now coping with an explosion of COVID.
Tharaphi, I guess one of the questions that a lot of people are asking right now is, you know, companies that have been affiliated in some way with Myanmar's military have for a while now come under criticism from members of the international community, from UN investigative bodies. And it didn't seem to bother them when there were these atrocities that were being committed against the Rohingya in Rakhine State, which became a huge humanitarian crisis. The UN called it a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Why is there this outrage now, and why now might we see more companies cutting ties with Myanmar's military?
Exactly, right? The companies only care about, their PR, right? Facebook had to come and, answer the questions at the Senate only after, their reputation has tarnished in terms of, not taking down the hate speech, hate campaigns and instigations on Facebook regarding Myanmar. So these also, I think that companies conveniently forget that absolute wealth needs absolute power to protect it. Since there is nothing going on to take away that wealth, so after 2017 and now after 2019, the international the ICJ cases, so they will only try to protect their interests even stronger. So and then the business world has to wake up and realize that they colluded with the powers, and so they could have preempted this coup. And also, what I would like to point out is that these business companies have double standards around the world. So if Telenor was asked to ban internet in Norway, will they do that? Right? But they didn't hesitate to do it. So I would like to call on these two companies to self-reflect and stop these double standards around the world.
Ronan, there is a school of thought out there espoused by some analysts who worry that broad U.S. economic sanctions against Myanmar's military could harm Myanmar by cutting it off from potentially more diverse foreign investment, and that if that were the case, China would just fill in the vacuum. What do you say to that?
I think circumstances are not quite as they were maybe 10, 15 years ago in this regard. I think it's possible now for the US to impose very targeted sanctions that focus like a laser beam on companies connected with Myanmar's military. I mean, there was a United Nations Human Rights Council report about this in 2019, and they recommended focusing very clearly on companies connected with the military and simultaneously supporting business in Myanmar that aren't connected with the military. I think a couple of things have changed in recent times too. I mean, the engagement of the US with Myanmar changes the playing field remarkably. Companies like Kirin did not feel in the aftermath of the Rohingya crisis in 2017 that there'd be meaningful consequences for them internationally, either reputationally or in terms of penalties. They obviously feel there will be now. And I think what we've seen this week at the United Nations Security Council, that China did sign up to a statement from the Security Council on Myanmar. I mean, China's relationship with Aung San Suu Kyi was very good prior to the coup. China's support for Myanmar's military post-coup has been less than fulsome. I mean, yes, they have not condemned, but it's not the wholehearted support that the coup leaders would have wanted. And I think it's possible now to make use of the US's engagement and China's feeling that maybe they would have got a better deal out of the civilian administration to really make some changes in Myanmar. I mean, there's young people on the streets. They do not want the military back. I mean, most people in Myanmar are young, born after 1988, when Aung San Suu Kyi came to political prominence. They don't want to return to a country ruled by old male soldiers.
Debbie, it looked to me very much like you wanted to jump in and add to what Ronan was saying. Please go ahead.
I think we can't use China as an excuse to not to act. A lot of people have been saying, what about China? Well, China is there, but China is also part of the global economy, and it has increasingly had to be accountable for its engagement. So I think when the US and when the rest of the international community lead, and whether that's targeted economic sanctions, which is really needed, but also through stakeholder and consumer activism, China has to listen because it depends on global supply chains and global markets.
Tharaphi, what do you think? Could there be a type of targeted sanction that would make a difference now? And also, you know, is China going to be listening this time? Will they take it differently than they have in the past?
I would like to point out three things. So one is going back to Ronan. So times are different now, right? So before, after the coup, international community had to do a catch-up game, trying to list all the companies and businesses that the government owned, right? Now we have the ready-made list. So particularly, to the works of organizations like Justice for Myanmar. So immediately after the announcement of the coup, everybody was sharing the list of the companies, the list of the directors, right? People were taking down Mytel. People were asking, the beer companies to come and take their beers back because they are not going to sell any of these, military-owned businesses and support by them. So people's awareness is probably the highest right now, and also the power, the younger generation, and I lived through 1988. I was 10 then, so we could only imagine what could be like without the military. But this generation has already lived through. They have the experience what it is like without having to fear and then look over your shoulders when you talk something bad about the government, right? This generation has experienced and actually are living it, right? They're not going to let everything taken away. So, and also Myanmar, like any other countries, like Tunisia, Afghanistan, shouldn't be the proxy wall for the global powers, right? So the foreign policies impact these countries. So now we are seeing tremendous progress in U.S. domestic policies. Only if they could be transferred to foreign policy. So say, how the U.S. deals with China, how U.S. deals with Russia. I mean, the overall look, the critique or the reflection of the foreign policies will help not just Myanmar, but the countries that have become sadly, become proxy wars for these global hegemonies.
Ronan, we don't have a whole lot of time left, just about a minute, but you and I have spoken a lot in the past about the plight of the Rohingya, and I want to ask you if you think that this new focus on the military and this increased pressure on Myanmar's military will bring more attention from international actors to the plight of the Rohingya.
Well, it's important the Rohingya situation isn't forgotten in all this. It's important that international actors don't go back to a focus solely on returning a form of democracy to Myanmar that doesn't deliver for everyone in Myanmar. But the young people on the streets today in Yangon and Mandalay and elsewhere, they don't want a return to the broken democracy that allowed the military to mistreat the Rohingya as they did in 2017 and since. They want a genuine democracy for Myanmar where there's civilian oversight of the military, and any changes that diminish military power in Myanmar will be good for the Rohingya.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Debbie Stothard, Ronan Lee, and Tharaphi Than. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, AlJazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.